Hello, my name's Gary Ford, Managing Director of Tiger Hobbies Limited. On the 13th of September, just before Operation Market Garden, Montgomery may have been having second thoughts because he tasked Canadian First Army to send a formation to capture the port of Boulogne and advance to the Scheldt Estuary. The formation chosen was Canadian Second Corps, commanded by General Guy Simonds. Now, the Canadians had a hard time in Normandy and they were still trying to get reinforcements and weren't fully established. But they went forward, but they got to kind of the Leopold Canal, but they were badly beaten back by the Germans. Now, once Operation Market Garden failed, the Allies decided to go back to Plan A and try to go for the Scheldt, which certainly pleased Admiral Ramsay. This time it would be a much larger force. Unfortunately, the Germans thought this as well, and they'd moved more soldiers in the area as well. So this was the setting for an extremely large and tough battle. The previous Canadian general in charge of 1st Canadian Army had to go back ill. So the commander of 2nd Corps, General Guy Simonds, was promoted to command Canadian First Army. This would be the lead formation for the battle for the Scheldt Estuary. It would be much bigger. So it would be Canadian First Army, Polish 1st Armoured Division, British 1st Corps, British 49th Division, British 52nd Division, also Royal Marines and various other Allied formations, totalling about 450,000 soldiers, far bigger than Arnhem. The Germans themselves weren't going to take this lying down, so they moved around about 350,000 soldiers into the area, north of Antwerp, onto Walcheren and in the Breskens pocket. Now, the Breskens pocket was manned for the Germans by the 64th Division, which was the division left behind by the Germans before they evacuated. But this was a hard-fighting ex-Eastern Front division commanded by an absolute Nazi. And he would take no prisoners, literally. He threatened his troops, if you retreat in front of the Canadians and the Allies, I'm going to execute you. So this battle was not only a battle, this wasn't a battle for gentlemen, this was going to be a horrid, nasty fight to the death. The battle for the Scheldt Estuary would be fought over an area of eastern the Netherlands and northern Belgium that was mainly polderland. Now, polderland is land reclaimed from the sea, and the Netherlands and the Dutch are absolute masters of land engineering. Now, once this land is reclaimed, it is controlled by a series of dikes, dams and ditches. And whilst maintained, very useful land, great for agriculture, great for living. But we're towards the end of the Second World War, and there ain't no little Dutch boy sticking their finger in the down wall. Basically, maintenance wasn't being done and the land was starting to get soddened. This is ideal for defence, not brilliant for attack. The battlefield, or where this battle is going to be fought over, is an area known as the Scheldt Estuary. So as you can see on the map, we've got Antwerp down here, about 60 miles down the River Scheldt. If we follow the River Scheldt up, we've got the North Shore, which is South Beveland, and we've got the South Shore leading to the port of Breskens. And at the end of the Scheldt Estuary is the Isle of Walcheren. It starts with W, but it's pronounced V for Walcheren. The Germans have put 100,000 soldiers on this island. It's also got large radar-controlled guns. This is the whole point of the battle. If we do not silence them guns, no cargo ships are going to go down to Antwerp. So the scene is now set for one of the overlooked battles of the Second World War, the Scheldt Estuary. The battle for the Scheldt Estuary will be in 4 distinct phases. The first phase would be advance north of Antwerp to free the entry to South Beveland around a town, I apologise if I got this pronunciation wrong, Woendrecht. This will be the Canadian Army, 4th Division and 2nd Division. The second part of the phase, which will be given a name Operation Switchback, will be to clear the Germans on the south side of the Scheldt Estuary to free the port of Breskens. The third part of the operation would be Operation Vitality, which would take 2nd Division west along the South Beveland just before the Island of Walcheren, The fourth phase will be Operation Infatuate, which is the assault on the massively reinforced island of Walcheren. The Canadian Army, Canadian 4th Division and 2nd Division started advancing north of Antwerp, where they make fierce German resistance, including some elements of the 15th Army who'd escaped earlier on. The Germans concentrated a lot of the defences around the town of Woendrecht, and this led to bitter fighting in some of the worst conditions that Allied soldiers would face on the Western Front. It was cold, it was muddy, it was snowy, rainy. They did say that if you were wounded, not to roll into a shell scrape or you'd likely drown, just lay on the floor and wait till help came. The Canadian Black Watch on Friday the 13th of October 1944, obviously called Black Friday, were literally decimated as a unit, leaving very few left. But by the 24th of October, the Canadians had done their objective. They forced the Germans north of the entry to South Beveland. We can now start the next phase of the operation, Operation Switchback. This we're going to talk about now is Operation Switchback, the second phase of the operation to take the Scheldt. And we actually, while we're going to be talking about this, going to be looking at a film here, which is an old Pathé News film that shows the Canadians advancing on the Scheldt. In the film, they've incorrectly said the Canadians are advancing on Antwerp, and they're not. They're advancing on the Scheldt. But it shows you the actual conditions that the Canadians and the British and other forces are having to fight. Extremely muddy, vehicles struggling on the land. So Operation Switchback, the second phase of the operation to take the Scheldt Estuary. This is to clear the Breskens pocket and free the port of Breskens to help assault the Island of Walcheren later. Now the Germans have got the 64th Division there. Now they are operating lots of these 20mm anti-aircraft guns. I think over 100 of them left behind when the German army evacuated. Now, the Allied air power wasn't really present in this battle. Bad weather was keeping it down. So they would use these heavy 20mm anti-aircraft guns as ground weapons against the infantry. Now, don't get me wrong, no wound is nice, and being hit by a full rifle caliber bullet, either 7.92 with the Germans, 303 by the British, or 30-06 by the Americans is bad enough. But can you imagine the morale of seeing your friend literally ripped apart by a 20mm round? And these things are coming out here at 200 and 300 rounds a minute. But the Canadians were going to give as good as they got, and they were going to use a weapon that now is banned, well, certainly banned by the West. I think the Russians might be using a few in Ukraine. This is the flamethrower. You're going to use three types of flamethrower, vehicle mounted: the Churchill Crocodile, the Canadian Ram Badger, and the Little Wasp. Now the Wasp is a Bren carrier, a universal carrier with a small flamethrower mounted in it. But as you can see on the clip, when the Canadians are throwing the flames across this canal, I think this might be training for this, but it could have been part of the actual battle. But this is exactly what they did. Now normally the flamethrower, you go up to the enemy, chuck some flames in their general direction, they look at this and thought, I don't want to be burnt to death, and leg it. But here, there's no such quarter. They were going to literally pour it on them because they had to get across this Leopold Canal. And this is where the most bitter fighting in Switchback took part. Now, they also came across with using a vehicle called the LVT, which I'm now going to tell you a little bit about this landing vehicle track number 4. We're going to look at a vehicle that's essential to the Battle of the Scheldt Estuary, and this is the LVT-4, Landing Vehicle Track number 4. Didn't actually start off as a military vehicle, started off as a civilian vehicle in the back end of the 30s to transport people and goods through the swampy areas of the United States, you know, the famous Florida Everglades. Now, it wouldn't be operated by propellers because that'd be fouled up in vegetation, so it would be propelled by kind of cleats on the track. It would literally drag itself through the water. It would also drag itself across beach, coral, sand, and mud. And in fact, the military, especially the United States Marine Corps, were really interested in this vehicle and soon was adopted for US Marine Corps work. But in Europe, the Americans weren't really interested, but the British were. and one regiment, 5th Regiment, Royal Engineers, soon became adept at operating this vehicle. So a lot of the vehicles driven in the Battle for the Scheldt will be operated by members of 5th Regiment, Royal Engineers. The model we've got here today is one of our BMC play-ready models, and it's of one of the early LVT-1s, or Alligator. Now the problem with this vehicle is it advanced up the beach, the soldiers would have to literally leap out and thus would attract enemy fire. So what they needed was modification. So what they did was moved the engine, I think, forward and put a ramp in the back so the vehicle could advance to the beach, it could lay its armament onto the enemy, and the soldiers could exit the vehicle much safer and could then get their weapons into action against the enemy. Once the Canadian Army had assaulted and got over the Leopold Canal, and also LVT-4s bringing more troops in from what you call the Breskens Inlet, and British armour advancing up towards Breskens, they moved across quite flooded areas using LVT-4s to advance towards the Germans at Breskens. Now the Germans were unfamiliar with this vehicle and soon started to surrender to what they said were tanks. Now the fighting was bitter, but by the end of October they cleared the Germans out of the Breskens pocket, enabling the next operation, which will be Operation Vitality, to commence on the attack on the Scheldt Estuary. The second part of this operation is Operation Vitality. It's an attack, a two-pronged attack. First, Canadian 4th Division would advance north of Antwerp to a place called Bergen-Zoom, and the 2nd Canadian Division would advance west along the South Beveland Peninsula. Now, the German soldiers on the South Beveland Peninsula weren't the very, very best, and they were suffering from bad morale, kind of being left alone. But the Canadians outflanked them at the narrowest part, and very soon South Beveland was in the hands of the Allies. In fact, most casualties for the Canadians in this part of the battle didn't come from direct fire, with things like booby traps, landmines, and many soldiers were coming down with basic trench foot and hypothermia. But soon South Beveland was in Allied hands, thus the north shore of the Scheldt Estuary was in our hands, and now the south shore, as we cleared the Breskens pocket, were also in Allied hands. This led to the 4th Operation Infatuate, which will be the taking and assaulting of Walcheren Island.